on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Sour perhaps some men lack the daring ever to be free. They shun the heights and crowd the depths and court security. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Soured sea, but pride in singularity. Oh, never mind if men are wrong, so long as they agree. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Claim the power within you, error to defy. The world may change or disappear, but truth can never die. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday service in our beautiful amphitheater. We want to especially welcome those of you who are guests and visitors here, perhaps even for the first time, and also those who are joining us online. We'll begin with a reading from Rays of the One Light, which are parallel passages from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Ananda. I've been given instructions about the mic. The inner kingdom. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Most people imagine that the inner kingdom, as Jesus described it, lacks the fascination they attribute to sense life, the bright lights, the diverse attractions, the joys and the laughter. Little do they realize what a vast universe exists in their own selves. There are many passages in the Old and New Testament of the Bible that describe aspects of this inner kingdom. In the book of Genesis, we read, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." This garden was in no earthly place. It exists even now in the very self of every human being. The legend of Adam and Eve is allegorical. It describes how the first human beings dissipated their spiritual energy, centered in the spine. The spine is the channel through which flows the river of baptism and of spiritual life. The Bhagavad Gita tells us, the wise speak of an eternal Ashvata tree with its roots above and its branches below. The tree of life spoken of also in Genesis is the spine. Its roots are above in the brain's energy. Its branches are the outward spreading nervous system. When the sap, which is to say the energy, flows downward, the consciousness is drawn into delusion. On the other hand, when the energy is drawn upward in deep meditation, the consciousness is drawn toward its eternal source, God, and is at last united with Him. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita therefore urges his chief disciple Arjuna to embrace the yoga science, the path of meditation. The yogi, he says, is greater than the ascetic, greater even than the followers of the path of wisdom, jnana yoga, or of action, karma yoga. Be thou, O Arjuna, a yogi. For those who would find the divine truth, Krishna gives this description of the yogi. Steadfast a lamp burns, sheltered from the wind, steadfastly meditating, solitary. Such is the likeness of the yogi's mind, shut from sense storms and burning bright to heaven. Wherever you are, whatever your outward beliefs and observances, seek God in the silence of your soul. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I'd like to read from Whispers from Eternity, mystical poems by Paramahansa Yogananda. Demand for the opening of the spiritual eye, the eastern star of wisdom. Bless me, Father, that I behold the eastern star of wisdom. May it shine before my human eyes, as much in daylight as in darkness. Long my eyes were blinded by the tinsel glitter of materiality. Seeing things always outwardly, I saw not the spirit behind and within them. I saw the mustard seed of matter, but spied not the oil of spirit that it contained. My third eye of wisdom is now open. Oh, may it always be so. Let the gaze of my single eye of realization penetrate to the very veil of matter, to behold the infinite presence of Christ everywhere. Bless me that my sacred wise thoughts, following the star of knowledge, lead me to the Christ in everything. To the zealots who wanted Jesus Christ to be their king on earth, as we know, Christ said that my kingdom is not of this world. We're taught that the astral world is hundreds of times larger than the physical world, and it's just incredibly beautiful compared to the most beautiful scenery on earth. But that's not far enough. We still have an ego in the astral world, and if we have a tamed ego, we can feel great joy and bliss, but our emotions are intensified. And then we go to the causal world, the thought world, and things are just, as you'd expect in the causal world, the thought world, just a mere thought. I was reading about people's experience of Om, and how when people go deeply into Om, sometimes there'll just be just a seed thought of something existing, but it's the reality of Om and everything else that is the true nature of everything. And everything else is just a simple little thought. And when you hear Om perfectly, it's on the causal level. There's in education, they often in working with children, they use the model of a V. I learned this my first year teaching at Ananda school. And when children lack maturity, you put them down at the bottom of the V, and then they've got definite limits. And as they become more expansive, and they can rise up and have more space, they have more responsibility. And I was thinking about that and how God has worked with all of us for these 5 billions of incarnations that we've had, is that in the beginning, there's nothing more immature than the ego. And why is that? The ego is self-involved. It sees itself as the only reality, or at least it refers everything else to itself. And it's so focused on itself, it can't experience its larger reality. And when we go to we're confined to a physical body on this plane, and then in the astral world, souls that have an active ego, they aren't allowed to move very much. I read a book, I don't know if it's true, but it goes along, at least in spirit, of what Master had said on the astral world. But souls that are just awakening, they're sort of encased by a shell, and they just spend that time just enclosed. But advanced souls, they can move and wander all around the astral world. Well, Master used this image of cosmic consciousness being confined, or he equated it to 1 million cubic feet of air, cosmic consciousness. And he said that the ego, being identified with the body, confines that experience of cosmic consciousness into 1 cubic foot of air. And so this is why we don't want to have desires, because we identify, like with Dr. Lewis, he was admiring a large car, and Yogananda said, "Watch your desires, doctor," because that becomes our reality, very, very small. But once we can break the confines of the container, our body, our consciousness just spreads out through 1 million cubic feet of air and beyond. Yogananda said that our bodies, our Divine Mother's body is with comets shooting through space and stars and throughout infinity, and she is saddened when we identify with our tiny little body and not her great body, which of course is our own as a child of God. There was I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago in Oakland, and the speaker was actually the chief medical officer for the Sutter Health, and he was black, and his mother was a mathematician for NASA. And although she wasn't featured in the movie Hidden Figures, she was had a comparable experience as being a mathematician. And so he wanted to be an astronaut. He ended up being a doctor instead. But he knew the astronauts. And Bill Anders was one of the astronauts on Apollo 8, the first manned mission to the moon. And it didn't land, but it got into the orbit of the moon. And they were going around the 4th time, and they looked out, and they behold the Earth rising out of the shadow of the moon. And it was so thrilling to them, and so beautiful and so fragile and so precious that they forgot completely about the moon. And it was all about the Earth, and they were taking pictures. And one of the pictures, one that they were all taking pictures, the 3 astronauts. But Bill Anderson's one was chosen, and it was said to have started the environmental movement in 1968, or one of the causes. But I was thinking about that experience, just hearing him talk about his experience and how precious the Earth was. And the astronauts had to travel nearly 239 million miles away from Earth to gain that perspective. And in the same way, we have to travel away from matter consciousness to be able to see the divine in all creation. I was at Encinitas, that's Paramahansa Yogananda's hermitage by the ocean. And at the time I was writing a book called Om, the Melody of Love. And as I was looking out at the ocean, I was thinking of Yogananda's words. He said that the inner sounds of the chakras, which are on the astral level, you hear Om on from the spiritual eye on the causal level, but all the other chakras are heard from the astral level. He said they're just marvelous to hear. But he said even their physical representation are a good thing to listen to, and there's a real sense of resonance. It's not an exact quote by Yogananda, but I was thinking about that, and that's because whenever you saw a physical expression of the ocean, heard church bells, water, like a stream, all different manifestations of the chakras, you know what lies beyond that physical expression. And it can be very thrilling. It can just draw you towards spirit and to remind you of spirit. And of course, when you go far enough, the devotee will be like Yogananda, where he would just see lights, see everybody as light, great lights, and that's all he saw. Not too long ago, I had a healing, and it was a very interesting one. This healer helped to bring the energy up to the spiritual eye, and during the healing, I just saw everything as white light. And every form, there was the gurus there and different devotees from Ananda there. There was just a very hint of outline, just a tiny little line, just a few little specks. Yogananda said that every atom has individuality, and it doesn't lose sense of that. But in this experience, I don't know how accurate it was, but the feeling, I think, was correct, because everything was just united, and there was no difference between anything. It was just all light. And this is the experience more and more that we have the inner kingdom, where we know that we're unified with creation, and we've stepped outside of that polarization. This, especially the earth, the physical plane. We live in duality. There's pain and happiness, day and night, and everything has an opposite. And so you find yourself in opposition to other things, and it's hard to kind of move without that opposition. Of course, as you develop on the path, Satan, the outward flowing force of Maya, can step in, and even though if you don't have the karma to do it, it just is trying to stop a good thing. But this whole sense of just living in divisiveness, it's just part of living on earth. I remember reading about a football player, and his team had lost. And the reporter was just saying, well, couldn't you guys have played better than you did? And was sort of deriding their efforts. And I love the answer that this football player said. He said, well, we're trying to move the ball this way, and the other team is trying to move the ball this way, and they won this time. And you just can't win every time. But it's going into the stillness that we get out of that duality and out of that contentiousness. And that's when we find freedom, and we're just living in God. And as the affirmation said today, that, in God's truth, it's all benevolent. And we can just easily cooperate and ride with that truth. In meditation, there are two sacred tides. One is the high tide that moves out on the land, and that draws us, that manifests us, so that we have awareness of our individuality. And then there's the inward flowing tide that brings us back to the sea of spirit. And it's that inward flowing energy that unites us with God. And there was a friend of ours, friend of Ananda, who was in Mexico City one evening, standing on a balcony. And he was enjoying the city lights. It was just a beautiful evening, warm, and just the glow of the lights fascinated him, and he was enjoying it. And then, as happens sometimes in Mexico, there was a brownout, and all the electricity went out. And he was at first a little disappointed. He couldn't see the lights anymore. But then he looked up into the sky, and what did he see? he saw the lights of the planets, of the stars, and he was just saw that that was so much more vaster and so much more beautiful than the city lights, and more calm experience and expansive. And so that is always there. It's just a matter of just being quiet and still. There's Yogananda in his New Disciples, he always talked about the importance of being positive at all times. And there's a lot of dimensions to that. There's a humorous but very insightful story in the autobiography of a yogi. Shri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, had been ill and lost a lot of weight. And he wanted to regain his robustness and bring the weight on. And so he went to Lahiri Mahashaya, his guru, and he said that he'd been ill and he would like to be better. And so Lahiri said, I see that you've made yourself unwell. And then he said, I'm sure you'll feel better. And then the next day he felt better, and he was very pleased. And I think maybe, if a master can be, but maybe he was just playing it out, he was elated that he was better. And but then Lahiri Mahashaya said, "Oh, you had a serious illness, and you may not stay well. Who knows what will happen tomorrow?" And this cold dread of fear overcame Shri Yukteswar, because it was a very serious illness. And what if? And what if? And the next day, he was sick again. And he came and commiserated with Lahiri, and Lahiri said, "Oh, you've made yourself unwell again." And then a few further on in the conversation, Lahiri, Shri Yukteswar said, "Well," Lahiri had said that, well, it's your thinking that has caused you to be well and unwell. And so Shri Yukteswar said, "Well, if I think I'm well, do you think I will be well?" and Lahiri said, "Yes, even now at this moment." And immediately he just gained all this weight. And when Shri Yukteswar went to his mother's house, who lived in Benares, she was just freaked out. "What do you have, dropsy?" Because he was just like bloated. I don't know if he put on 40 pounds, but it was just really dramatic. And most of us have heard that story. But in meditating on that story, especially with the topic today, it's like we have to ask ourselves constantly, what reality am I identifying with? If we're negative, we're identifying with the state of duality, of contentiousness, of opposition, of limitation, of smallness. But if we're being positive, then and seeing life as good and benevolent, and this sense of unity of all the qualities of God, then we're identifying with God. And I think there's probably lots of reasons why Yogananda said to be positive all times, but it comes back again to what reality of consciousness am I identifying with? It's important on the path, of course, to listen and to enter into the silence. There's an amusing story that was told by an Orthodox Russian bishop, and I think he grew up in the 50s, and one of the favorite radio shows was the Goon Show. And I don't know if anybody remembers it or not, but one script was one character, the phone rang, and the character picked up the phone and said, "Hello, who's speaking? Speak louder. Who's speaking? Who's speaking?" And then from the other end of the line, the voice said, "You're speaking." And so the character goes, "Ah, I thought I recognized that voice." And then he hung up the phone. And isn't this sometimes maybe a little bit what happens in our meditation, in our prayer, is that we're just revolving some thoughts, or at least they enter in, and we're the ones that are speaking. And Yogananda said that God is speaking to us all the time. He was referencing it to Om, that from spirit, that the cosmic vibration is just emanating out. And Yogananda said sometimes the cosmic Om speaks to me in Bengali and sometimes in English, but it's always speaking to me. And so this is... We know that God is with us all the time, and we just sometimes forget. And so by our daily meditation, we get a chance to tear aside the veils and to feel a subtle presence of spirit, and as we concentrate. And then we carry that through the day, and we can stay in touch with God moment to moment. There's a beautiful story of Saint Herman of Alaska. He was apostle, Orthodox apostle for North America at the time. Of course, Russians thought that if they were on the North American continent, they were all of North America, I think. But anyway, he was a very great saint, and he lived on an island off the coast of Alaska. And a Russian trading ship came and docked, and they invited him to share a meal with the officers on board. And as they were eating, everyone started just spontaneously around the table. They just shared what was most important to them in life. And the captain said that I want to be able to come home and see my family, see my children again. The junior officers said that I would like advancement. I'd like to have my own ship someday. And it was all thoughts like this. And then St. Herman, he was asked, well, what do you prize most in your life? And he said, for this day, for this hour, for this moment, let us love God above all else. And Yogananda said that the minutes are more important than the hours, and that we're in the present moment, we have God. And the heart that is not seeking outward is quiet and inward and close to God. And when God knows that we want Him more than anything else in creation, He will come to us. Years ago, I had a dream, and in this dream, I was pedaling a bicycle through a wheat field, kind of near where I grew up as a boy. And I was going along at a pretty good pace with my bicycle, as much as probably a 12-year-old boy could go. And then I looked off to my left, and I saw a large falcon come flying in and flying parallel with me. And the presence of this bird was so thrilling that I wanted to stay up with it. And the falcon went a little bit faster, and so I pedaled faster to stay up with the falcon. And then it looked at me, and it seemed to say, can you go faster? And so it went even faster. And so I pedaled as much as I could just to stay with the magnetic presence of this wonderful falcon. And then it looked at me and smiled. Birds don't have teeth, but he smiled, I could tell. And then it started flying up into the sky. And then I left the bike and I flew with the falcon into the sky. And in thinking about that story with this topic, there's a spiritual equation that we're taught, that the spiritual path requires 25% of our effort, and we're given 25% of the effort by the guru, and then 50% by God's grace. But in this particular dream, I had to be in motion, didn't I? And because I was, God could help me. And so the more that we can offer ourselves into spirit, the more that God will pull us into spirit in that full realization. And more as the path we've seen, I'm sure, in our lives, that it becomes more effortlessly liberating, because there's a great magnetism, isn't there, of these inner worlds. We've all tasted it in some way, in a very thrilling way that just captures our heart. And so let us all of us, me, you, Anandi, everyone here, just dedicate ourselves more and more to this inner experience of God, so that we know our true reality in Him. Bless us all.
Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy